Welcome back, everyone. We are live for another episode of Growing with My Fellow Growers. I'm your host, as always, Jack Greenstock, joined by an amazing panel. I'm going to pass it over first to Spartan Grown.
What's up, everybody? I'm Spartan Grown. I'm an organic farmer at home and here in Michigan, and then at work, I do it all synthetically. So you can find me on Instagram at Spartan Grown, all one word. If you have any questions for either organic or synthetic gardening, or you can shoot me an email if you don't do social media stuff. You shoot me an email at spartangrown@gmail.com.
Happy to have you back, and passing it over next to Kyle Breeder.
Hey everybody, glad to be here again. My name is Kyle Breeder. What I do is I'm getting extremely exhausted. I create feminized seeds. If that's something you're into, I have a website for that. It's the letter P followed by breeding.com. For anybody that doesn't know, I've been trying to promote it this Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. I have a really big seed drop into play, and it's going to go pretty quick. So if you're interested in that, be there. And all social media platforms, pure breeding now. It used to be predicated breeding, and glad to be here. Thanks, guys.
Happy to have you back. Next up, Dr. MJ.
Hey guys, Dr. MJ Coco from cocoforcannabis.com. I am happy to be back. I was out last week and had a family issue I had to tend to, but I'm happy to be back and looking forward to the show.
Happy to have you back as always. Next up, Matthew Gates.
Hey everyone, my name is Matthew Gates. I'm an IPM specialist, and I'm happy to be here as always. And if you want to find my content about plant health and IPM, you can find me on my YouTube channel, Zenthanol, which is the same account that I will be commenting in the chat, for those who don't know.
Happy to have you back. And Noah the Grower.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Noah the Grower from Instagram. You can find me there. And most weeks here on Grow with My Fellow Growers. And how's everyone doing?
Doing well. Happy to have you back. And last and certainly not least, Aaron the Grower.
Thanks, Jack. Good to see you, panel, and Jack, and good to be back this week. I'm Aaron the Grower, atgacres.com, atgacres on Instagram. I wanted to give a quick shout out. Don't want to drag on my intro, but I wanted to give a quick shout out to Max Scrimmin Ruby and Smart Poker for having me on their podcast this week, Talking Buds. It was a blast. I hope everybody gets a chance to listen to it and follows those guys and subscribes to their channel.
I still need to check it out. I was the first person ever to be on that show, I think. Max Sherman Ruby's a good guy. They're a listener of the show, and Smart Poker is as well. And I'm happy to see that they got into making their own podcast as well. It's great to see the community grow in that way. So,
and nice shirt, Spartan.
Rocking the ATG Acres over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely make sure to check out Aaron's episode over there on the Talking Buds podcast, and that's Buds with a Z. And those are really good guys. So happy to see that they're getting more people coming on for interviews and making more content for the cannabis community. Everybody craves it. So Brandon, I think we've got an open mic back there, or we've got some echo in the background.
Yeah, it's me. Should I introduce myself real quick?
Oh yeah, sorry, I just hadn't gotten to you yet. But last and certainly not least, Brandon Rust.
What's up? Glad to be here. For everybody who doesn't know who I am, my name is Brandon Rust. I'm a cannabis cultivator. I do soil agronomy, microbiology, study lots of different stuff. And you can find a body of my work on Instagram at rust.brandon. You can find links to my company, Bokashi Earthwork, and my farm, Black Label Organics, in the bio on my page.
Happy to have you back. And sorry, I missed you on the introductions. As you probably know, like everybody else who is here on the panel, I sent out the link like less than a few minutes ago. Me and my wife were hanging out. We ended up taking some edibles and yeah, I don't know, a mix of gummies, a shot, some joints, infused things like that. They say that cannabis can make you lose track of time. And that definitely happened. I was checking every 5 minutes for the first few minutes of the hour and then just totally lost track of time. And Noah the Grower sent me a message and he's like, hey, are we doing the show? So I had to send the link out and get set up. So I'm happy that I was able to get here and get the link out. And here we are live and got the chat. Everybody showed up just like we normally would. So thank you everybody for coming back. It's great to have everyone here. It's our regularly scheduled meeting, so I would have hate to have missed it there. So I'm glad that we were able to get this thing running. But I'm curious if anybody has anything that they're, Kyle, I know that you were talking about your seed drop coming up, but if anybody has a topic that maybe they want to kick the show off tonight with.
Yeah.
What about plant health?
Oh, better than what I was going to say. Let's go with that.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say Jack's high as fuck tonight, and it's funny.
I was going to say, we could talk about does cannabis perhaps actually change your perception of time? Because I think that it did for me over the last hour, but it was also probably, I was distracted watching TV.
Wait, Jack, what is time?
Oh, that's a better question.
It's space.
It is. That's what they say.
It's a measurement of space.
The measurement of space. Okay.
Yeah, that's where the term space-time comes from. It's a dynamic of space. It's a way to quantify either a space in time or a space.
Deep, man.
Deep. All right, we can move past that. Let's go to plant health.
We are 4 minutes in and we've already gone off the rails, but
I was just gonna say we got a compliment on the last video in the comments. I don't always do it, but sometimes I will go back and see the last few videos and see if people have asked questions like specifically about IPM, but also just things in general. And I was just replying to a comment that said that they really liked us because we talk about cultivation and not like other stuff, which, I mean, that does happen. So like here, for example,
not like the nature of the universe and the space-time continuum.
Yeah, exactly.
Cultivation related topics. I'm down for some cultivation.
Plants exist within that space-time, and to get to that harvest time, I have been pushing my harvest time back, and I've never pushed it so long, but I've also never pushed my lights so low this late in flower. And since I think that they're not photosynthesizing as much, it's allowed me to not harvest as quickly, which probably sound like a bad thing, but for those who don't know, I had Amy Aces was 2 weeks ahead of my Donnie Burger, and the Amy Aces got a little bit close to the light. Anyway, I dialed it back, and that seemed to slow the harvest down. I normally would tend to see stuff finish around 9, maybe 10 weeks. I think I'm probably at like 11 weeks on the Amy Aces, and I'm definitely going to harvest it tonight or tomorrow morning. So it's been pushed very long and very ripe, but the Donnie Burger next to it is catching up and near crop, but it'll allow me to chop down the Amy Aces and deal with that, and then give the Donnie Burger a few more days to fill out the entire rest of the tent and get a little bit better light and airflow and finish up proper. So with harvest time, I got
a question for the group if you guys are open to it, unless you have something we're about to go into something else.
No, I was just kind of waxing poetic about how time does relate to cannabis and plants exist within the space-time continuum, etc. But go ahead, Kyle. Question.
Yeah, so I've been doing some research and I've heard different things, and I've reached out to some people that are like really heavily niched into the community, and I've heard different things. So I'd just like to hear what each and every panel member has to say about this, maybe factual or unfactual data. But in regards to once you have harvested a variety of its seeds, the question at hand is to freeze or not to freeze, and why or why not?
I wouldn't. I mean,
I
feel like you could run into some problems if you froze the seeds.
Yeah. Freezing the seeds isn't necessary. Keeping them chilled will slow down the metabolism within the seed and keep the seed viable for a lot longer. But seeds are always alive. Seeds are always metabolizing, and they're sort of burning through the limited amount of energy that they have. So the colder that they are, like refrigerator temperatures down into the high 30s, low 40s, that really slows down the metabolism and allows them to stay viable longer.
Now that's something that even myself, like intellectually, I understand that, but I often forget it in practice. I guess because it's not always super relevant to me. And I mean, on that topic, like, because usually I'm going to be using them in the span of time that works out.
But you don't know cannabis fucking seed purchasers, because they are people buy so many that they'll never grow them in their lifetime. So they should store them in some sort of, I think, cooled environment. Because if you live in like Southern California and your house gets in like the 70s and 80s, you have stuff for like 2, 3, 4 years. Well, now it's probably not very viable anymore, as opposed to if it was in your fridge or in like some sort of temperature controlled environment. Svalbard is I'm probably mispronouncing that. It's like Svalbard. Is a
Svalbard, yeah.
Genetics
sounds,
bank.
Yeah.
I think it's in Iceland or one of those places, but they keep a lot of seed frozen from like the very important genetic stock for human existence. Basically, like they have backups of like wheat and corn and rye and all these things. For some reason, there was some giant issue like that broke out with some like hop latent viroid or something, that became a big dramatic issue that we couldn't deal with for some reason or another. They'd have backups of the seeds stored and they keep them frozen. And Kevin Jodrey jokes
They
about
actually
how
grow them out though. You can only store seeds even at very low temperatures for a certain period of time before they will become no longer viable. So those seed banks, even when they're trying to preserve like ancient genetics and heirloom varieties and things like that, they have to periodically grow out those plants and harvest new seeds and then store the next round of seeds. And there's a lot of discussion in sort of the crop genetics universe and the researchers that are interested in crop genetic resources about the impact of growing them out and about how they should be grown out and about when and who under what circumstances and how the next round of seeds should be selected and all these, because every time you do that, things potentially could change quite a bit. So seeds, I mean, seeds generally, and some seeds won't do well frozen. Some seeds will become unviable. I think cannabis is not like that. Most cannabis seeds can be frozen, but I don't know that you're getting any big benefit over that as opposed to just putting them into a near freezing temperature.
Yeah, because I was.
I want to give
the tissue cells.
I just want to jump in and give the American one a chance to introduce himself because he just got here, and then I have some thoughts. About freezing seeds, but give people a little introduction, and then we're gonna keep the conversation going.
Okay. Hello, Jack. Hello, everyone on the panel. I'm the American one on YouTube, and the American one _ with 18s on the IGs. And yeah, I'm glad I made it tonight. I've lost track of time, and my alarm didn't go off. It usually reminds me, but glad to be here.
You aren't the only one who lost track of time.
Frozen seeds. Yeah. Go ahead. Whoever was talking.
Jack,
I said you weren't the only one who lost track of time. I got a little over medicated and sent out the link very late and lost track of time as well.
I don't feel so bad.
While you got the mic, the American one, what do you think about freezing seeds? Because Kyle asked, and then after you, I'm going to make a comment real quick.
Well, I would say if they're for really long term, I bet you it's a good idea. But I would also say I don't know enough, and I would also say that definitely you would want to make sure they're dry to a certain extent so that they wouldn't be able to freeze and like expand with water content, because I've heard that's basically what ends up killing them. So
yes, that's a problem with seeds. Yeah,
I also think like if you properly store them in a refrigerator, even there's studies that say they last like 10 years, if they're properly dried and in not too hot an area.
10 years is definitely more achievable. I've seen Kagyu, Kagyu on Instagram. He was a coastal seeds breeder. He popped a 40-year-old cannabis seed and got it to go. And I've also seen people doing stuff with like test tubes and tissue culture, popping older seeds as well. But the thing I was going to say about storing them in the freezer is kind of like the American one alluded to, is you have to have a proper method to make sure that you don't ruin all of them. Because if you put them in and they had too much water content and that freezes and expands, you could literally kill every single one of those seeds. If it swelled too much, it could break the outer shell. But if you do it properly, get them nice and dry. A lot of people use like a thermos, and then inside the thermos, they'll have like a jar with like a desiccation product. I personally like to use paper towel because it's usually fairly sterile. You can get them in like plastic wrapped things or whatever, and it absorbs moisture, and it's cheap and available. So as opposed to like rice and other things that might cause bacteria or whatever, molds, mildews, paper towels can be. So I know people will then recommend like, bake the rice or whatever before you use it to store the seeds. But I have definitely seen people store cannabis seeds for 20, 30, 40 years and have them be able to pop. The issue is they tend to not have a lot of vigor, but one way to counteract that is using gibberellic acid or GA3. And Kyle's actually experimented a little bit with that and giving older seeds pop. So I'll actually pass it over to Kyle and just kind of thoughts on that.
Yeah, so basically the last 2 years, the New England rock candy and anything that I've ever sold in the last 2 years, during that time, there was a big debate whether you should not so much freeze for storage purposes and keeping them, but more so air quotes, reenacting Mother Nature and freezing them over just for a couple hours and then, or sorry, a couple of days and then pulling them out just to defrost, just to give them that flash. And that was kind of where I was heading initially with this topic, is like some people are like, oh, you should definitely reenact it. But then I talked to Mean Gene, he's like, dude, I've never frozen seeds my entire life.
It's like an overwintering.
Right. Yeah. So the last bit, so like I said, so the last few years I did freeze them, and I've gotten nothing but good feedback in regards to germination rates. So like now I don't know what to believe, like, or not so much I don't know what to believe. I don't know. I would like to see, is there, you know, when you freshly harvest a plant, to freeze some and then not freeze some, and then see how the vigor between those two processes work.
Here's my question. So like, here's another aspect of that. Like recently, you know, I actually had posted about some research regarding the plant's ability to interact with different microbes, and much on the top of the Svalbard seed saving and that sort of a thing. Like modern cultivars versus sort of ancient or even like, you know, wild plants have very different abilities to do these sorts of interactions. And it's interesting to me, in a lot of cases, you know, there are even such things as seed endophytes. And I wonder if the process of cooling down or freezing or however people are doing it also upsets the seed microbiome itself. That's, you know, I don't know to what extent that has even been looked into.
Yeah, I'll say that some of them strains are grown in areas that wouldn't freeze over ever. So like, yeah, if it's a sativa equatorial, they would never see freezing temperatures. So that is an issue too. But I like put them in the refrigerator for that reason, thinking like, you know, they feel that cold autumn, winter kind of spell. But who knows? Like, I don't know if there's any truth to it at all, but I've never had issues with them like dying on that. It just in the refrigerator anyway. But, and the endophytes, I'm sure would survive down to 40 degrees. You know, you got to almost boil stuff to kill them, right? A lot
Some
of bacteria.
stuff survives on the moon. So,
right.
I mean,
And some dies off quick too, though, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, what's interesting is like you can think the other way too. I wonder if the freeze actually cleans up endophytes that would normally be something that could turn out being bad.
Oh,
Could
yeah.
be a good thing. Could be a good thing.
Not all endophytes are good after all. That's a good point.
Yeah,
actually.
considering the new post that Sink Angel did, some endophytes or even bacteria in your soil is bad that you don't want to add, maybe.
I think that the tagline for that post should be, even the good guys aren't always good guys, or sometimes there are better guys that are taking up the space of the good I'm sorry. Sometimes there are good guys that are taking up the space that better guys could be.
As to the idea that good guys aren't always necessarily good with like the mycorrhizae induced
susceptibility.
Susceptibilities. So in my eyes, it had always been positive, but there are potential edge cases where it might open me up to something that maybe it wasn't susceptible to previously.
Absolutely.
Not everything is black and white, but.
Oh yeah. Well, like, and touching on that, one of the interesting things is that like I was saying earlier, some of these modern cultivars and cannabis, of course, is sort of like, it has its very interesting, unique context with regards to this, but still domestication in general, you know, has caused a lot of plants to have a very different relationship. And in a lot of cases, because those relationships are mediated by the immune system, they just don't have the way, you know, and I've talked about this a lot, but they just don't have a good way of dealing with certain microbiome dynamics. So certain microbes that, you know, they like, because of course the plant has to find it has certain ways to like tell, you know, as by proxy, oh, this is a good relationship, this is a bad relationship. And in some cases you got microbes that will use the same proxy, but they are not going to have the same level of like exchange, or possibly even no exchange, in which case they become an outright parasite, or basically a parasite, because they're getting a ton of photosynthate from the plant. You know, if they have a very, I'm talking about like not just like things in the rhizosphere, but things that are like, you know, joining with and like, you know, either ecto or endo spheric interactions that are actually integrating themselves in the root zone, for example. You could have a situation where a plant is sending a bunch of sugar to the or whatever other nutritional needs to the microbe, and the microbe is giving basically nothing in return. And in that case, plants have very limited options. Usually they have two ways of going about it. Either they keep that from happening in the first place using proxies, which can be faked just like any other proxy, or they sanction it. Basically, they essentially like attenuate the resources that they're giving to the microbe. And but still, it's still already there. And so if you have this happen a bunch, I just wonder, it's one of the reasons why I advocate for people to know what the microbes are that they're using, and to not sort of take it on chance that the microbes, even like that they're harvesting. I know that IMO is very popular, and I'm not like against that or anything like this. I actually am for it. I think that harvesting local microbes is going to be something that will be greatly benefited by procedures that let us tell, well, what is this local microbe? What are these strains? How are they different? And are they actually benefiting my plant? I really think that technology is, coming.
I think that rapid PCR gene, so you can tag the genus, species of different fungi and bacteria, that type of technology is just becoming more and more available because of the millions and millions of dollars of research that have gone into identifying and mapping out genomes for different microorganisms.
Yeah, sometimes you can only test like sometimes you can only be limited to knowing what family or what order the organism comes from. But yeah, again, it really just depends on how you're doing it, and and I think that's very cool. I guess, but like, yeah, at the end of the day, I think some people preach for diversity of the microbiome. Obviously, people aren't saying like including the pathogens. But the issue is that like there is no good guy. In fact, I'm writing an article for Skunk Magazine right now, and that's actually the topic. Is basically that like the microbiome and the plant's interaction with the environment is constantly in flux, and there are things that we're learning about this relationship that should give us pause and consider, even in like a regenerative agriculture sense, what are we introducing, and basically not to like assume that there's this black and white dichotomy. It's really a spectrum, like a lot of things in nature.
A little bit to the freezing or even like cooling example. Just thinking about like what we use refrigerators for in general, it slows the decay of our food. And I think probably the basis of that is maybe it's slowing down the microbes' ability to break down or whatever. Like with pests in a colder environment, a lot of them reproduce much more slowly than they do in a hotter environment. Not the case for everything, but a lot of things move slower. Like humans, when we get cold, it's a lot harder for us to move around quickly. So it's interesting, like the slower things tend to decay. Like the seeds tend to last a little bit longer when they're frozen or stored at refrigeration temperatures. I've mentioned this in the past, but with my velvet punch before, because Kyle actually mentioned, and another individual I talked to who was a breeder said that they had like a lower germination rate at one point, and then they took some seeds and then they froze them, and the germination rate actually increased from what they believe to be an overwintering effect. So I tried to freeze a batch of 10 seeds. I put 10 in my Curador, 10 in my refrigerator, 10 in the Curador, and then I just left 10 out at room temp. I germinated all 30 of the seeds, and it was like 30 for 30. So what I concluded was any of the methods would work for at least short term. And I thought, the Curador is at least cooler than my house, and it'll slow the degradation a little bit. And it's the most convenient to me. So I think people should probably do it in the way that is going to be convenient for them. And the one thing that I've also heard mentioned in those conversations that I forgot to bring up earlier is with freezing seeds, if you're going to freeze them, then, plan to keep them in there for years. Don't be taking them in and out, or like have smaller batches, because if you keep taking them in and out, there's a chance that there's going to be moisture building up from going from like the freezing temperature to your room temperature, and then sealing and unsealing jars or whatever you're keeping it in. So be cognizant of that, and don't just be taking it out all the time. If you're the type of person who has to go look at your seed stash all the time, then be aware of the repercussions that might come from pulling it in and out of the freezer.
You know, I'm lucky enough to have central AC here and everywhere I've been, and I just keep my stuff in a cool, dark place. And as long as you know, I don't have any issues, then you should be able to store them for a relatively long time. I did have the seeds that Guarding the Lost Terps, Greg, I think he actually came on here one time. He found feral fields, and he collected a bunch of seeds from different varieties up in southern Siberia. And those seeds, those particular seeds, actually would do better after. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to freeze them, like put them in a bag. It was more like, you know, you have to wrap them up so they wouldn't like freeze, you know, keep them in, you know, wrapped up in a cloth, in a box or whatever. But they did better if they went into the cold environment for, you know, a week. I saw that firsthand, but you know, I didn't.
He's got some cool stuff, that guy.
Huh?
Guardian of the Lost Terps. Yeah, he reached out when I posted that in 1994 Northern Lights. He said that he asked if he'd do a trade. I was like, well, do you have anything that would survive the winter? And he had like this massive list of stuff that would like survive the cold. And I was like looking.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
So I think he's out doing, you know, running around in Russia right now. So he'll come up on, you know, places where he can source feral varieties of cannabis. I worked with some of his autoflower stuff. So they're hardy plants.
Brandon, what do you get for terpenes off stuff like that, like those plants?
You know, it was really indicative of a lot of the earlier stuff that I smoked in the 90s, that really heavy lemon pine, kind of almost like the cleaner.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I got off all the stuff that I was running. I only ran the one variety. I still have some other stuff that I never ran. I'm just holding on to it for when the time's right. But it was really reminiscent of that type of stuff.
Aaron, the grower, I just see your message just only for the first hour. So I wanted to give you a chance to maybe weigh in. Do you have any thoughts on the freezing seed conversation, or maybe anything that Kyle and Brandon were talking about?
It's all pretty been, I think you guys have covered it pretty well. You know, I have a fucking fat seed stock that I keep in the fridge, vacuum sealed at this point, to avoid like any kind of moisture exchange. But, you know, like I said, I popped seeds that were 10, 11, 12 years old on this last run. And, I had pretty low rates, but I still got like, a little over 30% of them to pop. So no gibberellic acid either, you know, just raw dog soil style.
Natural. Hey, I mean, 30% better, anything better than zero after like a decade, I think has to feel like a win, because you've kept the genetic alive and you have another chance to run it. So I'd be happy to keep them growing, you know, but. So we have a few questions from the chat that I did want to get to. Sal Blydenberg says, how many fans do you run in your tent? Airflow can be a little difficult and tense. And I thought about it, and I think the actual answer is 5. I have a tower fan, like a mini, like half-size tower fan on the bottom of the tent that oscillates back and forth. I have 2 clip fans above the canopy, the exhaust fan, which I think that's 4. And then I have an intake fan, which is like just a booster, which draws in air. And I've never had mold or mildew, and keeps the air flowing a lot. The plant seems to like it. It's probably a little bit overkill, but to be honest, to not ever have to deal with mold and mildew issues, I think it's worth it. And the plants actually, I think, respond pretty well too. They grow giant, thick stalks for being indoor plants, and tend to support with like being staked up and things like that. So I think there's a lot of benefit to having lots of airflow. And I'm curious if any other tent growers on the panel have any thoughts on that, because we also have a few other questions.
I got something interesting to show you guys real quick. So somebody sent me this. It's an organic growth stimulant for a bunch of different things, but primarily they sent me for as a seed starter. I don't know if you guys ever seen this or not.
So it's hard to see. It says Rev organic growth stimulant, maybe.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about it?
I don't know shit about it. I just know that they sent it. I don't remember who reached out to who, but basically I was having, we started talking about like really old seeds. Like, oh, we should try this product that we have. And apparently it's like the next thing since sliced bread in regards to like not doing like tissue culture. So I'm gonna try it soon. I'll let everybody know what
Yeah,
happens.
let us know how it goes. I don't want to give them a free plug just because they sent you some free shit. No offense, but I don't want to become that kind of show.
Yeah, no, I didn't know
I
if
mean,
you
if
guys
they're
ever.
I hope it
if you
works
guys ever
well.
Heard of it or not? Yeah, I wasn't. Sorry, I was trying to do that for sure.
If they're calling a plant growth hormone, it's or regulator, it's probably something like terbilic acid or one of those hormones. That's what's in the seed already.
It says the ingredients are 100% organic humic compounds. So
So it's just humic compounds. Okay.
whatever that means. Yeah.
Maybe like a humic acid. I know people use humic and fulvic and things like that early on to try and promote things. But what about Bob has another question. How would you all address top growth leaf tacoing? It's not heat stress. I backed off the lights and upped the RH. So
I already got into this with him a little bit in chat. I said it was probably a nutrient element ratio issue. Something might be getting too high, and now we've sort of chatted a little bit deeper about that. And he said he was trying to can't remember what word he used, but give them a lot of calcium. So that may have caused issues with uptake of other sort of antagonistic nutrients like iron and magnesium and potassium. That's right. We sort of got with it. My first question about that was, how are you fertilizing? And just to be aware, most of the time, if your leaves are going to taco like that, it has something to do with the fertilization. Although it could be heat, it could be, but we had already ruled that out.
Could also be, it could
There's a
also
few-
be an unseen pest too. There's microscopic mites that will
Yeah, I'd
cause
say there's
the types of
Yeah.
damage.
russets will do that. Russet mites
Yep.
will make it do that. And so will broad.
But preferentially in the top part of the plant.
Typically,
In the top, yeah. And
Yeah,
I'd
that's
also
in the
think
canopy.
I'd also try
Yeah,
to
that's
check
where
out.
russets. That's where
Yeah.
russets.
where it starts.
You'll see a rusty brown little tiny worms all over everything if they're rusted. So you'll kind of notice it.
Yeah.
they almost look like your plant's being attacked by like fungus, right? And it's like
Yeah.
some kind of like a brownish, powdery mold almost. But you can't, because they're so small. You got to see them under a microscope. But if you're seeing that, you have a real bad problem already.
Yep.
Because I mean, those things are so tiny, and when you're seeing something like that, you're seeing a massive number of them. So
Yeah,
Another
russet
thing-
mites have three names. They're called russet mites, which is a color, right? Russet brown. Rust mites and blister mites. And I was definitely reintroduced to the second name when I visited a cultivation facility, and they brought me in. They said, "What's that?" And it was exactly what you're describing, Brandon, this writhing pile of definitely not spores and fungus, because it was writhing. And I was like,
Yeah.
That is a massive russet mite. Just pile is the correct word for it. Amalgamation. It was amazing. Also because like the plant didn't even look that sad just on that one area. Like it almost looked like somebody had committed like corporate espionage and just dumped a vial of them onto the plant. It was amazing.
And I think, if you get hemp russet mite, there are things that you can do to treat it. The physical removal of infected parts, if you don't have the ability to just cut your shit down and be like, oh, fuck this, I'm going to start over. Physical removal of any infected parts and then continual treatment with a rotating IPM and biocontrols is really the only way to go about dealing with it.
Yeah, definitely not
Making
using
sure
some
that when you
like
clone, you dunk, like you have to take preparations at every step to make sure that you don't run into any of those issues. So let's say if you have a mom and you're cloning, you should be taking care of your mom all the time. When you take cuts, you should be dunking your cuts before you plug. When you transplant your clones, you should be dunking your clones again. Like if you do all the back end maintenance, and then when you go into veg, you make sure you're spraying your veg plants or you're releasing your biocontrols, whatever SOP that you've created. I mean, it's going to be less of a problem. But I see a lot of times people will ask me, hey, what nutrient deficiency is this, or what's going on? And And a lot of times pest pressure, especially when it gets higher, can look like nutrient deficiencies. And so I'll see people be like, oh, I tried using this and this and this. And I'll say, hey, go look at the sticky cards that you have and tell me if the things either have an elongated pointed abdomen or if they have a blunt rounded abdomen, you know, and I'll get the answer. Oh, look, dude, you got root aphids. That's why you think you have a nitrogen deficiency, because those things are feeding on your roots and the plant is starting to pull all of its mobile nutrients from the bottoms because you have such a bad problem that all the roots are getting eaten up and the plant's not able to meet its nutritional requirements, you know?
Yeah, actually, on that point, I'm really happy you brought that up, because specifically for rice root aphids, and we can go back to what we were talking about earlier, but quick segue. I was discussing with somebody about certain symptoms of rice root aphids, and it's pretty common for people to say what you have just said, and it is true. That is definitely a symptom of those root aphids, because of their feeding in the root zone. Those mobile nutrients, you know, they you can see it. They yellow. They go chlorotic, even if they're not close to senescing. But an individual I was talking to was saying that is what they use as a way to tell. But they said instead of looking at the roots, and I want to tell people out here that it has definitely been my experience that you can have a pretty sizable colony of rice root aphids on a plant. And not see that nutritional sort of chlorosis occur. So I just want people, in case people were operating under that assumption that, oh, my plants look fine, there's no rice root aphids. That's not always necessarily the case. Specifically, if you only get a couple and you're not really very vigilant about it. So be vigilant, stay vigilant. I think that's the main point that Brandon was articulating about rustics and in general. And I heartily agree with that.
I mean, you have to do your regular scheduled maintenance, and and I can't express that enough to new growers, because it has to be something that's just like inherently there, that they always know to do.
I feel like I don't want to sound like a broken record, but like that is a big thing that I think people just they just overlook, and for multiple reasons, especially in a home grow situation. But at a commercial level too, it can be hard. Not enough hours in the day, not enough personnel tasked to doing it. I just had a conversation with a client who were articulating some of the ways to go about having a better vigilant system. And you know, maybe this is less relevant to the home grow, but cross training is something I'm a massive advocate for. And I've worked with people who have dedicated scout groups who do all the scouting. And I've worked with people who have done like a hybridized cross-training system with a dedicated scout group. I find that the latter is almost always better, because the first people to see a problem are not necessarily going to be the scout group. It could be the CEO walking in and taking a look, or it could just be somebody working in the cultivation line on the irrigation or de-leafing, or doing one of many other tasks, and they see something odd, because they have training, hopefully recognize it, they report it, and they can immediately react to that. If you know, so
it's not too dissimilar to like at Disney, everybody has to pick up trash, and it shows that like where there's issues in the park, and like even the CEO will pick it up. But Spartan had his hand up, so I wanted to give him a chance to jump in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on that question before we walk any further away from it. And that's there's a couple of things we didn't bring up. I know that he said in the question that did he say he raised the light or dimmed the light? I can't remember.
He said it's not heat stress. I backed off the lights and up to the RH.
It didn't say either way. If it's not heat stress, it still could be light stress, depending. So that even if you have a nice cooling there, if you have too intensive light, that can also cause that. But what I'm thinking too is it could be a physical thing to air too. A lot of people like to put air movement between their light and the top of their canopy. And if the canopy grows into that air movement, you'll get those top leaves that are at the top of the canopy will start tacoing pretty quick, because it's just blowing constantly on it and it just can't transpire well.
It's defending itself from the wind.
Yeah. So if it's only on that, only at the top, and you're only seeing it there, look for physical things like bugs, wind, and heat or light intensity.
Did we find out if it's organic or synthetic grow? Do we know?
We don't know. I think.
Because I'm curious. The reason I ask is because I think the solution is relevant in my approach. I think that pH would be an indication of a nutrient deficiency or toxicity, kind of like what Doc was getting at, but approaching it from without having to do a soil test or anything like that. Maybe just testing the pH of your soil.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe the pH is wonky.
Well, if I would,
Yeah, there's
I
all
would think
sorts of
if it was
things that
the
could be
whole
like
plant,
that, but
but if it's
you
Can I
know,
throw
whenever
something
you
in
run into a
before
problem,
we even speculate more? So I'll pass it right back to you, Doc. But before we speculate more on what it could be, I just want to make the comment that when you cause a stress or a damage to your plant, you're going to see responses for the next few days, in my opinion. It's reacting to what it just had happened to it. So even if you dialed back the light, and even if heat was maybe an issue before and now it's not, you're still going to see some of the tacoing. It might not recover. It might recover, but those leaves might stay tacoed, just as a point. So I just wanted to throw that in there before we continue on. Maybe other things that it could have been, because it could have just been the light or the heat or whatever has already been discussed. But go ahead, Doc.
if they really tacoed, unless it was just sort of temporary heat, I don't think the leaves are really gonna get back. Maybe if there were like a wind reaction, it was small, temporary. If it was something caused by mites or if it was something caused by nutrient imbalance, then they might sort of like flatten out a little bit again, but they're never gonna like look healthy again fully as those leaves. There's what I was going to say is whenever you run into like any problem in your grow, sort of no matter what it is, I think it's a good practice to think about, well, what has changed recently? What might I have done a little bit differently? I mean, half the time we're like doing something differently in our gardens and like wondering if it's going to provoke a change. So I think that that's always a good place to start. And in this case, he was saying, I think I've changed a certain nutrient ratio and been giving more dose of calcium. So that's one of the reasons that you sort of like narrow in. And that's a good way, I think, to try to diagnose some of these things. And he's growing in organic living soil. It's really hard to otherwise know sort of what might be up with certainly nutrients in there, other than thinking back about what you have been doing in the past. You're right, pH tests might be able to reveal one sort of class of problems, but there's a lot of other things that it's going to be tough to precisely diagnose. So I think that oftentimes it becomes easier just to think back about what's happened to them recently.
That's a great point. We have another question from Sal Blydenberg. Sorry if I mispronounced the name, but Brandon Rust, have you had to add iron every other week to pretty much all soils you use?
Okay, so this is a really good question, and what it comes down to is the chemistry that is involved with iron when it comes in contact with water or a certain pH range. It oxidizes extremely quick. And so what happens if you have an adequate amount of iron? Here's a good example. The soil here in Oklahoma is full of iron. That's why they call it red dirt. But it's red because it's oxidized, which means that it would have to be reduced into its ferrous form to become biologically available. And the problem with this is that, when you're operating in the type of system that I operate, a modified growing mix, a peat-based system that has a ton of pore space and oxygen, it retains large amounts of moisture. These are all things that are going to affect the availability of iron, not just iron, but other molecules that will change in the presence of, hydrogen, depending on the chemical, the molecular form. Iron, when you look at it from a soil perspective, there's a certain number that you want. You want it to fall into solution at a certain point. But what I'm seeing is that it's very difficult to keep it at maximum sufficiency in these types of systems. That being said, there's different ways that you can go to make it more available. Iron is actually one of two elements besides zinc that can utilize the three different forms of uptake: diffusion, inception, and what's the third one? Dr. MJ, Coco, help me out here.
Oh, sorry, I was totally paying attention to my chat. I wasn't paying. What were the first two?
Diffusion, mass flow, and inception. Sorry. So iron and zinc can both be absorbed through there, right? So there's different ways that it can be acquired, but it has to be in an available form. So what I've been seeing is that when you add something like a humic fulvic acid to the water before you add in your apatite, which is your mind mineral, right? Before you add that in, more of that is going to be available. So less of it is going to oxidize in the presence of oxygen in this pH range in the presence of water. So even though you could add that in, it's not all going to be 100% sufficient. And none of these molecules are going to be really 100% sufficient because of the different ways that they're actually able to be accumulated. You know, phosphorus, for instance, the only way that it can be accumulated is through diffusion. And so it has only one way that it's going to be able to, and it's one of the most important elements because it's responsible for all the energy. You know, it's responsible for ribo 1,5 biphosphate carboxylase oxygenase.
So we have a lot of questions. Not to cut you off too soon, Brandon, but we have a few guys that are only going to be here on the panel with us till 8. I think you might even be one of them. But I want to make sure we can get to as many questions as we can tonight before the people have to take off. So I want to try and go ahead and get to the next one, which somebody says, can you address the recent buzz promoting nitrogen increase in flower? Cocoa, Sensi Cocoa, and Bloom Yellow brands do this in their suggested mixes. GH Flora and Flora Flex Newts do not.
This is increasing the ratio of nitrogen during flower.
Yeah, so they're basically saying like they believe that they're seeing a recent buzz and promoting increase in nitrogen going into flower. Sensi Cocoa is doing it and Bloom Yellow brands is doing it, but they're not seeing it in the GH Flora or Flora Flex brands.
And it's nutrients is pushing this too.
What do we know what form of nitrogen? Is it like you know, because I know that there's one of the two, or you know, there's more than two, but one of the two primary forms of nitrogen is more useful to the plant in flower, and one is more useful to the plant in veg. So it may have something to do with that. Speculation.
Okay, so what I see utilizing data and then also working with some other people, there are certain ratios to help keep things balanced in solution from reacting chemically. So unless something's like has a EDTA chelated molecule, that's not going to change. What a lot of times these things are going to react. So getting the ratios correct. And what I've seen is that if you match nitrogen and calcium almost throughout the cycle, but then just let the nitrogen completely fall off, maybe the last 3 weeks of flower, that you're going to get better results. So there's certain things like when you're looking at from a nutrient standpoint, you can take potassium over, so you have potassium, right, over calcium plus magnesium. So if your parts per million or your percentage of, parts per million, because the percentage is different as they relate. you would take the parts per million of calcium, let's say it's 150, and then you take the parts per million of magnesium, let's say it's 60, you have a total of 210. So your potassium should be equal to or greater than that total number. And then you take like your nitrogen and you're looking at what's your total nitrogen. What's your total calcium? Your calcium's 150. So you want to be running your ppms of nitrogen at 150 as well. Now, when you start doing that drop off, when you're not fertigating or when you're just kind of just feeding water at the end of your cycles to just let the plant kind of do its thing, and I don't recommend it for a really long time. You look at your nitrogen levels later on in flower on the later stages, and you do want that to drop because you don't want an abundance of nitrites left in your flower or excess nitrogen that hasn't been complexed, because that's where you get like the harsh flavors. And that's what's been, I think has been associated with like the white ash and the harsh flavors. And this is something that you can look back into like tobacco, over fertilization back in colonial times, they would inspect crops. And if the product didn't smoke how it should because they was over fertilized, they would get rid of the crop. They weren't allowed to put it onto the market.
I'm just curious if any of the other bottle growers, no other grower, I know you use bottles. Do you have any thoughts on the whole nitrogen early in flower thought? You're muted, Noah. Maybe you're AFK.
So, but early in flower, are we basically talking during the bolt, the stretch?
That's kind of my assumption.
Yeah.
That's what most of the nutrient recommendation lists are sort of mirroring.
Yeah, so plants definitely still need nitrogen during that phase. I mean, they need nitrogen basically the whole way through. The nitrogen needs don't change significantly in the plant. The only thing that really changes is that the plant, when it's really in a flowering period, can use a little higher ratio of P and K, but then needs don't really drop off. If you stop nitrogen, you basically are forcing the plant into like a starvation mode, which again, like Brandon was saying, if you do that right at the end, there's not a big problem with that. But certainly keep I don't think there's any benefit to increasing the amount of nitrogen during that early period of flower, but there would be problems if you really tried to drop it off too much. And most nutrient schedules don't really sort of drop nitrogen that much into later into flower that I've analyzed, at least.
And the importance because K regulates stomatal opening, which is going to affect the translocation of nutrients. And you need to have P, a steady supply, right? You can't interrupt that. And it can be difficult. One of the
flower
things,
growth, yeah, particularly.
If P is responsible for the enzyme that breaks the carbon dioxide and converts it into carbon monoxide, and for the formation of ATP, which is the exchange currency. So you don't ever want to run out of gas, right? Because then you've stopped the whole system. K, it needs to be abundant because it's going to help regulate the uptake of minerals from the soil. So, but the thing also is, as a nutrient, calcium interacts with phosphorus. So when phosphate is released, that's the available form, it can quickly bond with calcium ions to create calcium phosphate. So lowering calcium in flowering can help facilitate some of the energy needs, because it will make the phosphate a little more available. So pulling
it also makes potassium a little bit more available. Yeah. Having less calcium makes potassium more available.
Yeah, it'll make the potassium more available, but it'll also kind of that reaction between
The
calcium and
phosphorus
phosphorus will
available.
happen.
I got
Since
you. I'm
it's
following
less
you. I agree.
calcium, you'll get more phosphate. So that's an interaction that we're looking at as well.
I was gonna say maybe the two different nutrient companies, the one had a lot of nitrogen early, like throughout the whole cycle already, and that's why they didn't want to up the nitrogen. But if they're going by percentages, then that would mean that they accounted for that. But I was wondering, like, even if you front load nitrogen, it'll get sucked out of the plant relatively quickly, I would imagine, right? Or you can't really
you
front load
can't.
it.
The plant's not
Yeah.
going to store a bunch of nitrogen for later use. It can reallocate nitrogen to other places, but you quickly
It
develop
will.
a toxicity.
So if you're if you have a way overabundance, but typically what's happening is the nutrition from the soil is going up to all of the top portions of the plant. Anything that's not used immediately is reallocated through the phloem back through the channels and back down as, you know, sugars, food that feed the soil. But I forgot what I was just saying. I'm really stoned right now.
Let me pop in real quick and give a little bit of a sign off here. I know there's a few more questions real quick, so I won't have a chance to get to them. So real quick, Ranty Social Autocropper asked, what is the best way to save terpenes? Temperature. The other two questions that were asked, I do not know the answer to, so that's my input. I am Aaron the Grower. That's ATG Acres on Instagram and atgacres.com. Please go check out Talking Buds with my boys, Smot Poker and Max Scrim and Ruby. They do a really good job over there promoting proper fundamental, you know, grower sort of information. And they also like put out this historical sort of landmark with their podcast, with just like we do. So it's always good to talk to those guys. So I encourage everybody to go check them out. I'm going to post a link to it in the chat here once I sign off, so everyone can check it out after Spartan's boys get on, and boys and gal. And yeah, anyway, good seeing everybody. I'll see y'all next week, hopefully.
Thanks for joining us, Aaron. Have a great rest of your week.
Peace out, Aaron.
Good night, man.
Thanks.
See you next
Later,
week.
guys. See ya.
Take it easy, man.
I think Kyle, you said you're going to be leaving at this time as well. So if you want to give your final shout outs and maybe plug your upcoming seed drop.
Yeah, this old man's got to wake up early for work tomorrow. Yeah, so Kyle Breeder, I specialize in feminized seeds. My website is very desolate right now. I have no strains on there right now, no varieties actually. I just pulled the last one off because I'm out, but I have a new drop coming, so that's a positive thing. And that will be this Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Everything will be live. So whoever wants to get involved with that, some really cool crosses, New England rock candy, the root beer by GMO by Root Beer Back Cross that I got specifically and directly from Mean Gene and Skunk Tech that they were working on, and and the strawberry sugar cookies that I have, that's like an Afghan cherry and wedding cake cross that is like just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful plant. It all crossed with green Bodhi's hazy kush. But anyways, there's some really beautiful material in there. But yeah, so that's happening, and I just appreciate everything we're doing. Glad everyone's here. We're all still safe. We're home and all that good stuff. And see you guys next week. And Pure Breeding on all social media platforms. Feel free to reach out. Always chat with anybody that does. And or email me at purebreeding, the letter M, the letter A for Massachusetts at gmail.com. And thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Have a good one. Thank you for joining us, Kyle. And was anybody else going to be leaving at this point in the show?
Have a good one, Kyle. Peace out.
Yeah, I'm gonna get out of here too. I'm up in Seattle. I'm gonna go to a Seahawks game tomorrow and hang out with my buddies. But yeah, I'm No Other Grow on Instagram with 2 E's. I didn't get to say a whole lot because everybody here is a bunch of ninjas, and I'm not getting in the way of any of you guys. So I try to get in the flow when I can. I will be here next week. You guys have a great show.
Thank you so much for joining us, Noah, and we definitely look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Have a great one, Noah.
Have a good one,
Later,
buddy.
dude.
Love, Noah.
I'm going to be dropping the link in the chat to join the panel here in a little bit, but I want to get through the rest of these questions that I've copy pasted. Aaron touched on one. It says, what is the best way to save terpenes. So I'm actually going to do a little share screen action for just a second and show, and I'm not sponsored by either of these products, but I have used them. This is a Curador study that shows terpene concentration. The Curador is the light blue up top. They have a 1.5, which is stored basically over a year's time. It's like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 1 year. And then you have the control, which is just room temperature. And then you have the humidity packs, both Bovita and Integra Boost. And you see they lost basically more terpenes than even just keeping it in a jar at room temperature. And
That's
the other
crazy to me. That's
Yeah.
it really lends to the idea that a lot of growers intuitively said, and this was way before I ever saw this data, they said to me, to my face, dude, those things steal the terps. They steal the terps. They've told me, like, because I won some Integra
man.
at a 420 thing for free. I was trying them. I thought that they did a decent job, but I don't like to deny the data. And this isn't necessarily fully conclusive, but
Yeah,
I think
this
it's
is from
a pretty
the
good indicator.
Oh, so kind of.
The other thing is,
replicated and they can do it again. I wouldn't ever cook my weed personally. I mean, damn. I look at those things and I go,
well, this one's a little bit more up in the air. So I was going to actually have a conversation about the herbs now. So in this study, they actually had higher terpenes than they did a hang dry 14 days at 60/60. Their terps were 2.26 in the herbs now. The THC bomb had 1.34 terps in the dryer, which is actually lower than the air dry. So the air dry was higher in that incidence, but the air dry here 0.77, and then the ultimate, where it's in the herbs dryer, was 1.24. So it was a split in that case. But it's interesting because like the THC is higher in the one that has the lower terps. So there's a little bit of a trade-off.
Because that's what you'll see. You'll see less water content means higher concentration of cannabinoids, but also what I see is that drier flower doesn't often contain as many monoterpenes.
Well, this one, they have terpenes 10.61 milligrams per gram, and this one has 10.28 milligrams per gram. Again, THC is higher in the air dry, lower in the herbs now on this one, but the terpenes are very slightly higher. It almost looks the exact same though. If you look at these numbers, it's pretty much the exact same result in this instance. There's other people.
Figure margin of error on the test results. Those are the identical numbers pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, it's within, there's no significant difference. So in my perspective, you have a much smaller drying space. You're not using up like a whole tent or air conditioning and things like that. And you're getting it in 4.5 days versus 2 weeks. So as far as a business would be concerned, I think a lot of people are going to look to maybe try them out. But then there's another person who like called them out like, hey, look, I tried the herbs now and I was not happy with it. And they're like, we're trying to be transparent. So they showed this testing where this person had lower terpene content with the herbs now than they did with the hang dry. So
I think the problem here in this example is that we don't know the air dry parameters, right? So everybody's air dry parameters are going to be different. So it's going to be hard for them to replicate it.
They're saying 60 degrees and 60% humidity is what was used. Scott from Herbs Now has used that, and Grow Eat Easy has used that as their standard, as the hang dry standard.
Right, but are they in a sealed room? Or are they in a closet? How good is their air dry area? That's what I'm saying. Some people take it more serious than others. So, maybe she took it really serious, and then the person who tried to replicate it didn't, and that there might be a mistake there.
I did it in my Curador, which keeps a perfect 60/60, and I did it in my Herbs Now, and I think the Herbs Now product is infinitely better. Like it's almost twice as good in my user experience. I have the option to do both. I use the Herbs Now. I got them both for free. One was gifted to me by a listener. The other one I won a few years ago on my wedding as a 420 giveaway. So I try to think that I'm as unbiased as possible. I did 3 harvests in a row where I did side by side, and every single time the Herbs Now won for me. But I still use the Curador to cure my stuff. So to follow up, after I dry it in the Herbs Now, I stick it in the Curador. I think cold does preserve, but there is something about drying the plant down, getting the moisture out of the plant, and then getting into the jar without having mold and mildew and any issues.
I mean,
I bet you there's user error
Herbs Now to dry, and then the Curador to cure. I like that.
I bet you there's
it's a killer combination, but you don't need the Herbs Now, or not the Herbs Now. You don't need the Curador. You can go on Best Buy and look up Wine Fridge. in any wine fridge. I don't want people to like get the cannabis tax. I think that's a little bit bullshit. I won mine, so I got them free. I'll be honest with you. You can go find a wine fridge that keeps 60 degrees and 60% RH. There's also photography equipment cabinets that keep 60% humidity and 60% RH. So look around, find used ones, clean it up, and you'll be really very, very happy. Every single bit of cannabis I get, I stick it in there for a few days and it comes out better than when it came in with the Curador. So it's definitely, I think getting it cold and keeping it in the proper humidity, I think does create a higher desirability of the cannabis when it's finally dried and cured.
I bet you're right.
That might be obvious, but I mean, it's, I was shocked to see how much a room temperature, like even if it's like 68 degrees or 70 degrees or 72 degrees, that 10 or however many degrees makes a big difference, especially over time, days and days. And like the other thing is there's a UV protectant on the glass, so you're not going to get any light, getting in there. And I don't know, it's an interesting thing, but like I said, a refrigerator or a wine fridge can do the exact same thing. But the whole herbs now thing, I think it's just about consistency. Like Spartan was saying, some people's 60-60 isn't the same as other people's 60-60. They might set up one little temperature gauge and assume that the whole entire room is 60-60. But if they have a giant ass room, it might be 60-60 over here, but it's not 60-60 over there. And it's a lot easier to control a small space than a larger space. In some cases, it's actually easier to control a large space than a smaller space. So it really comes down to your setup, like you were saying, and how confident are you that you're holding a good 60-60? Because like he dries and cures in a dedicated dry space that I'm pretty confident that with his machine setup that he has with a dehumidifier and an air conditioner, he pretty well has it controlled where his space is going to be 60-60. So
I actually
or as
store
close to
there
it
too. That's why I took the time to build it out, so I'd have the space to store on shelving on the sides, and then I can also dry in there.
I was going to say, there's probably ways to finesse the herbs now performance, right? And like, isn't there, you could add a tray of water, a little saucer or
there's a
something
humidity
like that?
shot if you're in like a dry area. Personally,
Right. So
I've never
people
had
may
to
have
use it.
been using it wrong for, not the best that they could have been.
Like
as
any
well.
kitchen appliance, there's
Right.
user error and there's a learning curve. Like I have the extract craft. We did not
Sure.
run it perfectly the first time. It took us a little bit to figure out how to like, get every bit out of it and like when to pull the oil and things like that. But I think there are great devices and there are people that maybe misuse them, or maybe they didn't grow a great crop. So shit in, shit out. So it's like you throw shit in there, it's not going to come out gold. But I do think more often than not, people don't give things a fair shake. But if they invested the money, like most people, I think even if they didn't get great results the first time, if they try it again, they might have good results the second time. But if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. I don't want people to beat their head against the wall. And so I think that people just have to figure out what works best for them. And there's definitely good systems. But I want to get to the next question. Roller City asked, has anyone played around with silica gel beads in the container when freezing and fulvic acid when popping beans? So I got a little bit lost on that question, but silica gel beads in the container. Has anybody tried those as the first half?
The only time I've used those was trimming, when I used to sit and trim and we had a bunch of people sitting around. I was like, I got to get this humidity down, and I bought those for that, set them on the table.
That's funny. I heard God, I want to say it was the Bad Bunny Nutrients was talking about maybe doing an organic soil with the gels in there so that when you water it, it would hold water for a longer time, and then the gel would store some of that water and release it back to the plant as needed. But that's as far as
what was the purpose of is it for, I thought it would be a desiccant for the seeds to like suck the moisture out of the seeds.
Oh, okay. So that was a seed related question. I was thinking about in soil and I totally misread it. So they're talking about, has anyone used silica gel beads, like the little packs that come in like your shoe or whatever, the desiccant packs?
Yeah. Yes. The answer,
those work.
The answer is, I'm sure lots of people have used that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they work.
I've never done it. I wonder if it would have any adverse effect on the seed.
They're usually in a sterile like little packet.
I put it on separate. Like I roast a tray of dry rice and I get it over 350 to kill whatever might be alive in it, or that's what I think anyway. And then I jar that up really tight and keep it tight. And then I add that to keep it desiccated, but not too dry.
Sure.
And there was something else I was going to say. Oh yeah, and the silica gel packs. I would, if I have like if they're already in bags or in centrifuge vials of seeds and then in bags and stuff, I put some of those in there just to keep the surround like in the bag with it, not next to the seeds ever, because I'm paranoid like Rust.Brandon is about contamination and shit. But I'll do that sometimes. But yeah, most likely I don't even bother with that.
We have another question. Hardly Rich asks, can you guys touch on the use of UV light supplements to increase terpenes, etc.? What I do know is from my grow, they've went to a facility over somewhere, I think in the UK potentially, where they're looking at hemp being grown, and they saw that with like plasma lights and UV lights, they were starting to see an increase in terpenes, whether it was cannabis, hemp, or like rosemary. So they're using it for their culinary cultivation to increase yields of those things that are highly desirable. And so I do think that there is a lot of interesting research. I would say it's sort of on the bleeding edge where I'm looking at it right now. Like, I think the small amount of risk that does exist with it might not be worth the extra effort. I think that you definitely can, if you want to go through all the effort of implementing it, you'll probably see a benefit. But I do think you'd also probably see a benefit from just adding like a blue spectrum boost or a red spectrum boost on whatever light you're using, or getting a more efficient light. But with that being said, I do think that there's lots of positive science showing that UV light in the right ratios and the right UV, because there's UV A, B, and C. You got to get the right one. So with that in mind, I think it's promising, but there's a lot that you have to consider when looking into that. So with all that said, I want to pass it off to the panel. Brandon, do you have any thoughts on UV light supplementation for increasing terpenes?
I was talking about light with George, who owns the NASA Agritech company out in Chicago. And he was telling me that the lower frequency is a higher energy wave. And so there are different processes that are going to occur at a higher energy state than a lower energy state in the plant. And so those are the some of the like different metabolic processes. And I don't have a lot of research. It's not something that I've actively like really delved into. But I'm sure over the next couple of weeks, after I start commuting back and forth, I'll know a little bit more.
I will say I did some research when I was building my LED and 440 nanometer light, which is pretty on the lower, like you were saying, like it's a high intensity. It's getting closer to UV. Like UVs are like 280 to low 300s in the nanometer wavelength spectrum. Might be a little over some people's heads, but that blue has been shown to not only increase terpene production, but also increase anthocyanin production. So I found that interesting. I like purple cannabis in my cannabis. I think that it is beautiful, and it might not always be associated with the most potent stuff, but I do think that it's pretty, and it's cool if it exists in the genetics to be able to make it express. So being a home cultivator in my little, few square feet, it's cool to see the different expressions and phenotypes that come out with, I think, the extra blue and red on top of it. But I think that was maybe all I had to say about that. UV, yeah, I talked about UV earlier, and I wanted to pass it maybe to Dr. MJ. Do you have any thoughts on UV? Because I know you've been looking a lot at lighting, but we had Hemp with GG on last week, actually, and they had a really badass light that I hadn't seen you review yet. And they're like, oh, Doc actually got me hooked up with this, but they had like I believe a UV bar or some sort of supplementation on there. So I'm curious your thoughts on this.
Yeah, GG's got the Spectrum X, which has supplemental UV lighting. Yeah, what was the question? I'm sorry. I get caught up in these chats and I'm just like chatting with people, and then suddenly somebody's like, hey, Doc, what do you think? I'm like, wait, what? I'm on a show? Hold on.
It says, can you guys touch on the use of UV lights to increase terpenes, etc.?
Certainly there seems to be good evidence that UV light can make buds better at the end, increasing cannabinoids, potentially terpenes. I don't know, Jack. Do we have a lot of evidence or a lot of science specific to terpenes with UV?
Not yet, but I think it's promising still because the early data, when they looked at like the high mountain varieties versus the lower stuff, where the higher UV levels were, the THC was increasing and things like that. There's also been studies like I was mentioning earlier with MyGrow, where he's gone over to facilities where they're using plasma, even indoor versus outdoor cultivation. I think the higher levels of UV can potentially bring out more terpenes and cannabinoids, but the science has not been done.
Right.
I definitely think it's speculative. But
Yeah,
I do think
I
people
mean,
are-
that's where I'm at with it too. I would like to add UV to the light, and I actually sort of like the way that that fixture does it. I don't think that adding 1 or 2 UV diodes to the full spectrum LED is the right way to sort of add UV light to your grow space. I talked to a bunch of companies that are coming out with integrated UVs with separate dimming controls and separate controllability for like the UVA light and the 660 nanometer red light and the 730 IR light. And all of this, it sort of strikes me that these would be better served as separate things. So getting a separate UV bar or having a light that has the UV bar added onto it, I think there's good reason to think that that could be beneficial. But like you're saying, it's tough to recommend these products without the sort of the hard data to really stand on and say, this is what it does, and this is what it does without it, and this is what it does with it, and this is why we use it, and this is sort of the return on investment of buying it. We're not to that point with it.
Yeah, like looking at their grow, like what else could they improve before they start adding UV? Like they probably could just get a more efficient LED, or they probably could just, get more fans or something else that would improve their grow immediately right then that we know is going to have an ROI. Where
the message I want to send to growers about the UV light is don't buy a grow light just because it says it has UV light in it, because most of those lights that say they have UV light, I mean, I tested one recently that literally had one diode. It had one UV diode.
Now they can claim it in marketing, UVA,
and then they can add it to the
UV.
marketing. Exactly. So think about that. If you're interested in the benefits of UV light, you're going to need more of it than the fixtures than most fixtures are building in. And you're not going to really want it sort of the whole grow necessarily. It doesn't, I think it's just overly complicated to like have a integrated controller necessarily that can change that. I mean, that's one way to do it, but you can also just get a UV light.
I also wonder if like this, I think you even mentioned this before, Dr. MJ, but like, I feel like there would be less marginal ways to increase the target, right? Which would be an increase in cannabinoids and or terpenes, right?
Right.
Or at the very least to balance it, like, because you might run into a situation where you get more of something but less of another thing, right? It's not going to be black and white in response. And I would be, Brandon, I see you, I hear you humming and hawing. Do you have an opinion? I'm curious.
Okay. So this is what I'm thinking, right? So does wavelength of light improve the cell functionality? That's the real question, right? Because if you're going to increase terpene production or a cannabinoid, like let's say CBD is specifically what? It's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and with a certain number of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen molecules. Now, the plant is taking carbon dioxide, turning it into carbon monoxide, taking water, splitting atoms, and then combining that carbon with other things. So can the light improve the ability to, on a cellular level? That's the real question that goes through my mind. Can we see
well, hold on. I want to encourage you to think about this maybe a little bit differently, Brandon. It's not just if it improves function. I mean, I think I agree with you a lot in terms of that's how we should think about PAR wavelengths and the light that we're giving to generate photosynthesis. But to the extent that UV is helpful in the production of terpenes or cannabinoids, it may not be because it's actually helping improve plant functions. It may be almost pissing the plant off, and the plant is responding to that. It is, provoking a response in the plant. Anyways.
There are some
So
studies.
look, I want to answer Brandon's question directly. Here it is, the Emerson effect. I mean, I could try and go back, but there it is. All right. So here you can see just red versus just the 730, when you combine them, you get a much greater result. So using different spectrums of light, yes, you can improve at least photosynthesis. And if your plant is photosynthesizing better, then it's going to produce more, right? I can pause it now.
So
I
what
like
I'm
Yeah,
looking
but that's
at-
not a UV light
Well,
issue.
I know, but I'm
yeah.
just saying, as far as like using a spectrum of light to impact how your plant is interacting on a cellular level,
Yeah.
it is producing more photosynthate
Yeah.
quantitatively.
My question is then, is that that biphosphate carboxylase oxygenase enzyme, is it being created more efficiently, or does the process in which that enzyme is involved become more efficient?
So my understanding has always, and perhaps is totally outdated or even maybe like outmoded by other processes. I don't know, and I'm curious to get people's opinion on this. But I thought it wasn't so much like a photosynthesizing effect as much as it's like, I guess it's all a reaction to photons at the end of the day and their energy level, right? But like, I thought that there was maybe like a kind of like a damage response effect.
That's what I was saying, Matthew. Yeah, exactly. I think that that's what UV does. It almost hurts the plant, and that provokes the plant to make more cannabinoids, potentially more terpenes, other things like that, as a response.
I'll say for sure I have the paper that it says UVB radiation or UVB light increases THC, but it doesn't say anything about terpenes. So I'll put that link to that.
Also, aren't terpenes like super volatile, right? So I would be curious if like that would have
They
a
are, and so I think
effect.
like Uncle Reefer, for example, I saw Grandmaster Level earlier in the chat, and I know Spartan goes on the Grandmaster Level show. Uncle Reefer is over there. I follow him, have for a long time, and I think HLG even did a thing for a little while where they had the UV like fluorescent light where they could clip it in and like plug it into the driver or whatever. But to that point, I think people are running it for like 3 hours a day max, like late in flower. They're not using it a bunch. So the volatility, cannabis grown outside, I had 7% plus terpenes from Mendo Dope Boys. They grow underneath the sun. There is UV out there, and they can still manage to get themselves, high terpene cannabis with the high amounts of UV that are produced by sunlight. And so I think it's the right levels. You have to just hit that level properly. And micro
nutrition too. Nutrition is going to be a huge part, so they can create all those chemical compounds out of the elements that they're absorbing.
So I wanted to ask the chat because I just admitted Cheddar Bob, because we know Cheddar Bob. He's a good dude. He's been on the show before. But we have a Lewis that's trying to join. I don't know who that is related to. So if you could identify yourself in the chat, I'd be more apt to letting you join. I just don't want to have some
King Louis
random person jump in and start saying some inappropriate things and require us to
don't
come
let
out.
Cheddar Bob send the lobsters.
Yeah, I'll say inappropriate things anyways. But.
That's what we brought you on for, though. At least we know if you take off the shirt, you'll have a Superman or a superhero shirt underneath it. So we're safe there.
It's true. Got a little War Machine on.
How's the garden doing? We got an update from you a few weeks ago. I know you got some cherry pie going on.
Yeah, that cherry pie will finish 8 weeks. This one right here on Thursday. So I'm gonna chop it down. It seems to finish a little bit faster under the LEDs for some reason. Only needs to go 8 weeks. So, but you guys were talking about UV supplement, and this is what I use. This is Solicure. I don't know how many of you have heard about Dennis, but like this is just a 2-foot light, and it covers. I have, this is the other one. I have to put it in my tent. But I run that in between the Photon Tech bars. About, I don't know, it's about 22 inches above the canopy as they're starting to stretch right now. So I'll raise that up, and I keep the UVB A light, the flower power, about that height. And I definitely, on one run, I ran it on just one light, so it covered like half the garden, and or half the tent. It's not really a garden.
It's a garden.
And I could totally tell the difference
from the UV penetration on that half
Really?
of the
What was
long
the
are you
than
running them?
from the other half.
What was
The colors, the anthocyanin response was
Oh, okay.
faster. The purples came out.
I thought you were
And
going to say you saw big glands of resin.
yeah, no, well, actually, the heads were larger on that side of the royal
see,
spill
that counts big.
than they were on the other side. And the way that I knew was because I trimmed each side separately, and the heads actually wouldn't go through my trim tray from the UV supplement side.
That's
How
a
long did you-
huge
Which
fucking
was-
head.
How long
Yeah.
did you run those?
150.
Yeah, like legit, it looked like sugar grains. It was insane. It was the first time I'd supplemented a whole run properly using the UVB, whether it be time and height and stuff like that.
So how many hours you put it on for each on period?
I have it on for 2 hours at like the high point, what would be like high noon,
Okay. Perfect.
so, my time it's
6
like
hours
mid-
into flower.
What's
Like
that?
6 hours,
Five.
like 6 hours into flower.
Yeah, so my lights come on at 7. It's on from like 11:30 to 1:30. So
I want to say cheers to Lou Groen, who just jumped in, and he said that he's got some limarilla that I think he wants to show off, and just give him a chance to introduce himself. And thanks for joining.
Very cool.
Cheers, y'all. Pretty humble to be on here. I've been a long time listener and pretty much learned a lot about growing from y'all. So much love. Everyone can hear me okay?
Yeah, we could see you and hear you. We're doing great.
Well, I'm going to try to be quick, but I'm a little bit in between right now with my grows. But I just harvested limarilla and some mint mango from Umami Seed Co. And then I have this one plant left. This is Australian bastard cannabis. I feel like I should definitely share with the audience.
They would love to see
that's
that
it.
for sure. That's awesome.
This around.
You've got a good taste in breeders.
And this is probably last week before I chopper.
Oh, wait.
So I had this growing in my 4x4 and had to move it down here just to finish up in the 4x2. I have a Mars Hydro TS1000, just a few fans.
That's amazing work, how you got it all spread out. And it's interesting if you can get up really close so you can maybe show off one of the leaves. And for the people who don't know, ABC, Australian bastard cannabis, gets these kind of funky leaves like we're seeing right here. It's a amazingly different cannabis plant, but as you can see later in flower, it's more obvious. When he's panned out, it just looks like a bunch of nugs stacking. And great job growing it, because I know it can be a difficult one.
Looks like a basil leaf.
Looks
What
like
does
it's
it
in
smell
the
like?
Plant. And yeah, it's starting to go purple the last few days, just a slight purple hue.
What does she smell like?
Definitely, like, you want to trim a lot of the bottom stuff. And I kind of let it go at first, but at the end, I was really having to catch up pruning the skirts because it just becomes such a dense bush. But yeah, I'm really excited to chop this baby soon.
Nice. How does it smell?
I will say, because I've looked at it with the microscope and smelled it, it's like much less THC and terpenes than you would get from traditional cannabis. I'm going to guess that it's maybe a 10 to 15%er just by how it looks. And but it definitely has like an earthy, woody, piney, lemony kind of smell profile to it, I would say.
That's a great description, man. You gave a bunch of notes we could relate to there.
Some of those 12 to 15%ers will get you messed up too.
I'm really excited to see how it smokes. I know I don't have good light down here. I'm actually going to bring this upstairs so we can see it better. But here is my limarilla ready to be trimmed dry today. I'll bring it into a better view. I apologize for running around.
Are you getting the lime terpenes or aromatic profile off that? Or what's the aroma as you're walking up the hallway with her?
Oh, whew. It's delicious. I mean, it definitely has that GG4 funky smell, and it definitely has that lime citrusy zing. I would say it's more heavily GG4, but I basically kind of manifolded this and I messed it up because I missed literally one topping, and it kind of created like a quarter of the plant to not bolt as high. But
I see that.
ended up having pretty dense, beautiful. I mean, this plant was so beautiful. It finished super early. It chunked up super quick. It's a pleasure to grow. So thank you, Brandon. If you're still
Yeah,
around.
I'm here. I'm glad that you like it. I really like that. Like those ones that I grew out, they had the lime was more like a zest peel, right? It wasn't so much like the fruit itself, but it has this like kind of chemical funk too that just stays on your fingers and you can smell it.
Everything GG4 cross or straight up GG4 I've had has been great medicine, potent, just good stuff for me, at least. I'm a big fan. And Limarilla, in my experience, has been fire as hell every single time I've tried it. So maybe I'm biased because it's always been home growers who love the shit and do it well. So definitely good stuff. And I'm happy that you were able to jump on, Lou Grown. Very cool to see you growing out some of Brandon's gear. And did you have something else that you wanted to show us there as well?
I mean, that's about it. I'd love to get back on in the future because I'm moving soon. And when I have my new setup running, I would love to show you all my 4x4. All inspired off your technique. So I'm sure you'd all be interested to see how I do it. But basically, I just run my autos with my photos and veg my photos while I flower my autos and do a perpetual harvest that way. And I have a little veg tent, that 4x2, and I do a 4x4 flower tent. But yeah, cheers, y'all. Thanks so much for having me on. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. It was awesome to see the ABC. That was a nice surprise.
Really
Love
thank
it.
you, man. I like
Glad
it.
to share.
Keep out, dude. Yeah, thanks.
Much love to y'all. Grow love.
George love, man.
Have a good one. You're welcome on whenever you want to come back, whenever you've moved or whatever time. Whenever we send out these links, you're more than welcome to join the show.
You
Appreciate
passed the
it.
ethics test.
Appreciate it, y'all.
We look for home growers, good people, common interests. I think we've been very blessed with the community who's been able to come on and show off their garden and ask questions and things like that. I've always been very confident in the awesomeness of our chat. Just so many good people. People are answering each other's questions before we can even get to them a lot of the time. That just conversations going back and forth in the chat. It's like a whole different show. It's sometimes like Doc was saying earlier, like he's keeping up with the chat. It's like you can only either keep up with one or the other. It's like, you can miss what's going on in the conversation because the chat might be so engaging. So we're very fortunate.
It's a really unique opportunity for all of us to engage with people that are new to cannabis because the basis of the community starts with home grow. And so being able to integrate them into the type of, mindset, lifestyle, is it's nice to be that, to be a part of that bridging that gap, from people that know absolutely nothing to, a year later knowing who all the top breeders are and where they can look for good quality information. And
I'm happy that we're able to share and spread a lot of positivity and growers love. Cheddar Bob, I just spotlighted you there for a second. You were showing off the scrog, looking very good. Curious if you have any thoughts on some updates over there. It looks like it's progressing pretty healthy.
Yeah, we're about a week into flower. I think I flipped these on like the 16th or 17th. But I cleaned everything up, down. So it's not looking too bad. I got some good, just lots of tops coming up. You can see the application of green lacewing sort of stuff that I added for any sort of protection going into flower. I'll kind of rinse that off as I go through the next couple of weeks. Rinse that off with some foilers and stuff like that.
I know that's got to drive you nuts like it drives me nuts, man. You can get from like Arbico Organics, you can get, and it's their cheapest shit, these little hanging boxes, and then you can hang the boxes. They're open tops,
The
You hang the
satchels.
boxes, and then you can just dump that shit into the box instead of all over your plant. And then they'll crawl out of the box and crawl onto your plant that way. It's the way to get the shit off your plants.
You can do that.
I like
Sometimes
that.
I definitely solo cup also works well. And but sometimes you want to like get an even spread, and that can sometimes be more important. But I know I totally empathize. I feel like it's a cleaner sort of setup. And also I'm sometimes a little bit what's the word I'm looking for? I guess I always want to be careful with like the material. Sometimes it's vermiculite, sometimes it's bran, sometimes it's buckwheat shells, and especially for the latter two, you know, I always wonder, could that be a vector for like a pathogen? You know, if it gets a little bit too wet or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So Cheddar Bob, I saw you had a bowl sitting over there on top of that lobster wire scrog. What are you toking on tonight?
Let's see. That bowl happens to be some outdoor cherry pie that I grew in the earth boxes. I think you saw those ones, Jack, on my.
Yep, I think
on
we
my
even
raised
featured them.
porch.
I featured them even on a show that you weren't here, just showing off like earth boxes and how well they can do. But it's definitely. I'm curious. What are your thoughts, indoor versus outdoor? The cherry pie. Do you notice anything? 'Cause we were talking about UV earlier, and just the general observation of indoor versus outdoor.
So there's a few huge differences, and that just has to do with my environment. My back porch doesn't get full light like my indoor does. So there's that. The terpene profile is a little bit different. Just a couple different nuances that you can pick out here and there, but overall it's just that fermented cherry, like obnoxious sort of like cocaine ether smell, like you can smell it in their purses a couple seats down sort of stuff. But yeah, so the structure wise, the outdoor was much different. It wasn't as dense, more leafy, but I'm going to equate that to just the lack of sunlight, total sunlight hours. So, but I'm still very happy with it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because it's not like you're on like a mountaintop getting direct light all day. So the UV, that you have might not be enough to, be comparative to if you would have gotten similar amounts of light just with direct light compared to the indoor. But I think they can both be done very, very well. I do think that maybe with the UV included or like greenhouse or outdoor, I think that has a little bit higher potential. In my opinion and experience, I think the flower can just, the full sun, something about it can really bring out some awesome things in the plant, but it does depend a lot on the environment, which can be out of your control sometimes. So indoor is always, I think, going to be a thing in our lifetimes. And I'm very happy to continue doing it. So it's provides people consistent medicine throughout the years too, especially in areas like Michigan or Ohio, where they have pretty harsh winters. Yeah, you get a big Croptober, or even people who do autos get stuff, earlier in the year. But when that winter comes around, it's nice to have those indoor guys keep rolling and keep a nice, steady, fresh supply around for the people that like just A, fresher bud, but B, just, variety and consistency. So
I love outdoor too, man. I don't know, man. I love it all. I fucking want to do it all. But yeah, I was happy. I took down my outdoor. I got it to harvest. So I thought was an auto that wasn't an auto. Then I said, fuck it, I'm gonna leave the photo out there and see if I can get it to harvest in my backyard without it being ripped. I fucking did it. So pat myself on the back for that one.
And he did a freaking saw to come down.
Oh yeah, dude. I had a saw. It was, the trunk was like this at the bottom. It's still out there. I didn't even pull the pot. I'm like, I'm not even gonna try to pull it out. I'm gonna let it rot over the wintertime, then try to get it out of there.
That was awesome, man, to see that you were able to get it through not only rain, but you're in a area with some foot traffic and potentially could have had some, dumb kid jump over and take some or all of the plant in a single night.
Yeah.
So to make it through a full season with a plant that you were talking about doing an auto for a reason, it's a shorter cycle time. It's like less time for people to find out. But with that, it shows at least you had some pretty good security, and hopefully nobody really noticed because you kept it below that fence line. And I'm happy to see that you made it all the way to harvest, man. That's awesome.
and it had it planted right next to my herb garden. So like I'm not going to say it was completely camouflaged with it, but it did help keep the smells like mixed up, you know?
That's awesome. Advice for those out there, in Michigan, you can grow recreational, those 12, and sneak one or two in outdoor. And like you said, even if you lost it, you've got your stuff going on indoors. So it was kind of just like a hope. And it looks like you got a pretty decent harvest out of it. It
Yeah,
seems like you're going to
man.
have a good amount of flour to work with, maybe make some oil.
Yeah, I'm still drying it right now, but by the looks of it, I mean, I won't be able to tell until I start trimming on it. But man, I would say conservatively, there's a pound probably. So a pound, and literally, I watered that plant 4 times. That's the only work I did. No, that's not true. I did leaf strip it, but that was it, man. It was autopilot.
I'm happy for you. It's encouraging to those people that maybe want to try a little outdoor. You can definitely get by. I know the American one, you could maybe tell some stories about your guerrilla days of going out there and not being able to get to plants too often and pulling off harvest. And, you put enough out there, you can get a good crop.
Dude, a couple are really amazing. But like I said, thieves, they want to be thieves because they don't want to work. So if you just make it a little bit of work for them to get to your plants, most likely they won't get to them. So yeah, I would walk like a half a mile. One time I was there a long time for a half a mile, like walk half a mile in the woods, but no one until it was a hunting area. And I figured out hunters must have came across it. And then I went there one time and I had like a fence, but it was so rusted, you couldn't really see it. You had to like almost walk into it. I had a fence around the thing. And then I had this like one little stash spot. And when I was walking to it, I would walk on the regular path for a little ways and then break off of that and go in deep, And when I was walking up the regular path, there was some stuff that was mine that was at the spot. I was like, oh shit, what the hell is this? When I got there and noticed someone was there, I just turned around and never went back there. But yeah, I had 60 plants out in there one time. And I took like 12 at a time, clones. They were all clones. And that was the most I ever did. But yeah, really, it was like it was a religious experience at the end when harvesting the shit at that point.
So how many would you say in that 60 ended up making it to the crop? Was it like you came up to a little field like Ricky from Trailer Park Boys?
Yeah, and you could smell it. By the time I was going there to get it, you could smell it, like the wind was right. And I remember I only lost 2. That was the time that the termites, because I chopped down a tree, which I kind of feel bad for now, but there's just so many, and the growth comes back. I took down 1 tree, but I think that might be why there was some termites around. But it was all wooded, and like there was trees felled everywhere, and there was dead rotting wood all around. But I cleared an area. But yeah, that's when I had the termites. So I really had like 57 of them at the end. So that was really crazy.
On that topic, I just want to point out that it's true. And even Aaron had asked me this question recently. He asked, because I was sharing somebody's grow that got termites and the plants were alive. And he asked that because he thought the termites only went after dead wood. And that's true for a lot of termites, but Formosan termites are a super invasive insect. And they're very hard to eradicate. And part of the reason for this is because they'll go after both. And I feel like I'm seeing more and more examples of that, and certain ant species too going after live cannabis. So be careful, guys. Like, don't, and like you said, you felt like you had to chop a tree down in order to like, be successful. Like sometimes you have to treat these termites in a way, like that. You gotta get rid of their nests in some way. I'm a big fan of Beauveria bassiana or some sort of botanical insecticide, but they're very, very hard to deal with.
Yeah, they come in through the roots because the babies come in through the roots and then they burrow their way up to the stem. That's where I first noticed it was at the very base of the plant. Well, first I noticed the leaves were all yellowing, and then I expected the plant. I didn't see anything on the outside. But at the base, when you squeeze the stem at the very base where it was like near the ground, it was all spongy. And then I realized that it could be something that could go to the other ones. So yeah, I did. I uprooted the whole thing and put it in a plastic bag, and I took it back to my place to inspect it, is what I did. And I found them. And it took me like 4 days to Google search and to find out they were termites. Cause like your buddy, whoever, I thought they only eat dead wood, but apparently, yeah, they grow in. That's how they get in.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I want to give Spartan a second real
yeah.
quick to give his final thoughts and shout out because he's got about 15 minutes before he starts up at the Michigan Bros Grow Show.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody on the panel for hanging with us today, and especially the guys that came on that we haven't seen before. Louis, that was awesome to show the garden, and of course Cheddar Bob. I don't think I missed anybody today. And shout out to chat. You know, I've always loved chats. I always say this, but that's where I came from, man. I can't forget chat. That's where I was picked out of. Man, the very first show I ever did online was this show. So this is my beginning right here, and you know, I don't plan on leaving. So
we don't want you to, man. You've been a bright shining star in the community. I think it shows the people you can start in chat, and really, like, I think you're doing what is a lot of people's dream: working at a commercial facility, growing their own. You have control over your home grow. You're still around plants all the time during your regular job, getting to smell thousands of plants. You know, it's like that's something a lot of people never even thought would have been a possible dream when they're coming up, because you know the way things were legally. So I think it's cool to see.
It's like what Tao, or I don't know if it was Tao or you that said it. It was like a religious experience. That's my experience every day when I can open a flower room. And I know I'm small time. There's fucking greenhouses that are 10 times my size. But to me, that's the most cannabis I've ever seen in my lifetime in one room. So to me, it's still a religious experience. And when I get up on a ladder, especially to change out a bulb or something, or to mess with the dehumidifier, you know, maybe throw a filter in or something, and I get to see it all from a 20-foot tall ladder. It's just, my heart skips a beat sometimes still. So that's how I know I'm still doing the right thing, right? And that's why I got the smile on my face. So
awesome.
Cheers, everybody, and growers love y'all. And I'll see you guys in about 15 minutes on the Michigan Bros Grow Show.
Peace out, Spartan.
Keep growing. You can find him at Spartan Grown and also at Mitten Canico. If you want to email him, spartangrown@gmail.com. Awesome dude. Big heart for the plant. Just clearly so passionate. And that's why it's awesome to have him on here every week. I think that we've got a lot of guys on this panel that feel the same way about the plant, and it really comes across in their work. I've honestly haven't had the pleasure to go into a grow room like Mitten Canico or one of Brandon's facilities yet. It's all been underground for me or home grow level. And I've seen some greenhouses and lots of videos and driven past some stuff, but it's definitely still like, you know, so surreal to some people because we never even thought this would be possible. So to be able to stand over a sea of cannabis and to smell it and to see it in person is something that I think that everybody should get to experience at some point. I'm really looking forward to cannabis tourism taking off, like allowing potentially people to start touring farms and seeing live plants. So many people have never seen the live plant who consume it all the time. And that needs to change, I think. It'll start opening up conversations about what do they care about in the plant, and maybe learning about the terpenes and minor cannabinoids and other things in there. So hopefully we see more and more of that moving forward.
I used to like look at magazines and be like, oh my God, that looks so crazy. And then I'm like, then I can just like go into like my greenhouse and be like, dude, this is fucking awesome.
Well, like what I grew up looking at in High Times was like sometimes dudes, like other guys, grow rooms that were like commercial operations, which now are like tiny compared to what is like all over California. There's like hectare acres, like there's people just blowing it up all over the state. And same with Canada. You see like the videos of some of these facilities, it's like, holy fucking shit. Like look at this endless rows of greenhouses and a lot of this shit going unsold, unfortunately, because you know, they don't know the markets, but it's really interesting to see, even if it doesn't end up always the best.
I'm really excited about some of these new technologies that I'll be working with, which is crazy because it is organic, right? It's organic because all of the molecules required are attached to carbon. So it's pretty interesting. This carbon-based nutrient systems. It's pretty interesting.
It's funny because when I was on the show listening, when you explained a lot of the stuff last week, I didn't pick it up the first time, but when I re-listened to the show, it kind of like, I don't know, for whatever reason, it clicked the second time around. So maybe if anybody listened last week about that stuff and didn't get it quite the first time around, maybe a second listen through could help you pick some of it up. But it's very interesting for sure. I want to see the results. the one thing that you were saying that I never kind of like pushed back on or questioned more deeply was you were saying the plant started looking plasticky. And I was wondering do you think that is a positive sign? It's like a resistant thing, or like, I don't know. I hadn't ever heard you really describe plants like that before.
For me, it's associated with a high oil production when the plant is able to create, where it's expressing itself and it has everything it needs, and it's able to start creating like, oils.
Waxy coating.
It almost looks like a hard waxy layer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's, and I see it all the time, but to see it happen in the like really high PPFD in the R&D container, which typically I have to like do tons of amending on and like really have to push these smaller pots with their nutritional capacity, and then just doing a single application and seeing the results. To me, I was like, here's the thing, dude. I had this stuff sitting at my house for probably 8 months, and I never used it. And I was like, I'm going to try this out because, the dude, I'd been talking to him and stuff, and I thought it was, just a knockoff fertilizer or whatever. And when I actually used it, I was like, man, what's going on? And he's like, you should talk to George, and that's the guy that I got, hooked up with. And I was able to start talking to the guy, and he's like, dude, you need to come out here. And so I've actually shifted my focus, because my partner that actually owns the property where our farm is, where we've created, Black Label Organics. He's pretty dead set on selling the place because he's not from cannabis. He doesn't really he's not interested in the workload, because he didn't realize that it was going to be so much work. And that's the idea that he had in his head was different from my experience, which is I've been doing this 20 years. I'm not fucking rich, and that's not how it works. It's just you make your means and you pay your bills and you do what you love, so you're not working. But that's not the case. Also, what crazy thing happened was the escrow that I was going through, it collapsed because the person on their end didn't have all of their paperwork together. So I have, finances, and I decided I'm going to invest in my future because I have this once in a lifetime opportunity that's also time sensitive because of George's age. I mean, he owns a plant in Mexico and in China. And what they do is they use extreme heat and pressure in a catalyst to separate pure carboxylic acid, which is humic fulvic acid, from a certain type of apatite, which is the mineral that's mined. It's almost like coal, right? But it has a certain ratio of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen to it, so that it's kind of a pure form. And they're attaching these the micro and macro molecules that are needed for the plant growth, and you add it into the soil. It's associated with carbon and adds carbon into the soil, but it also adds the nutrition that can be utilized on metabolic demand because it's in a form that's available. So the nutrients that need to be, when the roots come in contact from like inception, right? It'll be there because it stays in a form in the soil structure.
It almost sounds like chelated, like a chelated nutrient, like sitting like a pot made out of chelated nutrients.
Yeah, that's one of the things that they're patenting is, the prototype was a peat pot that they actually just soaked in the nutrient solution. But what they're doing is they're going to have a very, very thin structural core, and it's not going to be made of peat at all. It's going to be made out of corn cob because it's a byproduct of huge agriculture. And the whole concept is to reallocate resources and have the proper resource management. Because what's happening is I'm learning that there's no plants use molecules, and those things aren't always organic because things that are organic are attached to carbon as far as the definition in chemistry. And so what I'm kind of reassessing is the being able to input carbon into the soil, but have the things that are available also chelated. And so that way they have different modes of action when they're, for the 3 different modes that are able to uptake. And so I don't know, it's just an interesting opportunity, and I've decided to invest my focus and my energy on learning as much as I can, as quick as I can, because he's really up there in age, and he has, you know, what he did in China, because he's been doing this, developing the technology for 30 years, and he's increased the protein content from 5% to 11% and doubled the yield. They're able to get 2 consecutive harvests off the exact same plant. And so other countries have adopted this, and it's because it's one of the biggest part of like the conventional fertilizers that are, you know, byproducts of petroleum distillation, is that a lot of times creating some of these the components that are needed are really energy insufficient, even though you can pull things like out of the air, like nitrogen, right? And hydrogen. Getting hydrogen from water is very expensive, right? It costs a lot of energy. And so being able to do things in a different manner, where it's not, where you're reallocating the energy resources, is really what the sustainability and it needs to focus as far as the science goes, right? Because there's
For sure. But hey, I just want to say that's probably a good spot to wrap it up and maybe give your final thoughts and shout out, because we only got 4 minutes left and I want to go around the panel and allow everybody else to get their shout outs in as well.
Yep. Well, I'm Brandon Rust. I appreciate everybody that tunes in to listen. And I love to be here and talk, because when I learn things, the more I talk about it, the deeper it sets in my mind. And so I appreciate all of the panel members. I appreciate people that listen. Brandon Rust, rust.brandon on IG. You can find links to Bokashi Earthworks and Black Label Organics in my bio.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I agree. Sometimes when you learn about something and then teach somebody something, I think when you teach them, it can imprint deeper in your mind. And with that said, another great teacher on the panel who's helped a lot of growers out there, Dr. MJ.
Hey, this was a fun show today. I'm glad I was able to make it back. I spent a lot of time just hanging out and chatting with the chatters in the feed there. Thanks, Jack, for remembering we had a show and getting here. I didn't even notice you were late, man. I guess that's, saying something about me. But thanks to the rest of the panelists. Thanks to all the chatters, everybody else that listens. I'm Dr. MJ Coco from cocoforcannabis.com. Come check us out. We're getting geared up for the New Year's Grow Challenge. I just dropped a video on germination last week. Doing a couple more videos coming out soon. And I plan to be back here again next week. So grow or love, everyone.
We always enjoy having you, whether you're just hanging out in the chat and engaging over there or talking on the panel. We always appreciate your feedback and also your content. I know the American one shouted out that seed germination video last week in your absence. So let the people know where to find the good content on the YouTube.
Thank you, Tao.
So, I won't keep them for last like usual this time. So I'll pass it next over to the American one.
Hello. Jack, thanks again for hosting as usual. I always love being here, and it was good to have on Louie and Cheddar Bob, and I always like listening to Russ Brandon, and everybody, Matthew Gates and Dr. MJ Coco, and Aaron the Grower, and Noah the Grower, and everyone in chat, peace. I'm the American one _ Keens on the IG, and I'm always glad to be here, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks again for joining us, and next up, Matthew Gates.
Yeah, I can totally relate with talking quite a bit on subjects that you really are passionate about. The things I'm passionate about, of course, include IPM and the plant health dynamics therein, which you can find in 3 main places. My Zenthanol website, zenthanol.com. You can find it in my YouTube channel, which is also Zenthanol. You can also find it on my Instagram at SyncAngel. I suppose also you can find it in my Twitter at SyncAngel. And coming up, I have an article in Skunk Magazine, which will go over the dynamics of the plant immune system and how that relates to cannabis in particular.
It's exciting stuff. I know people really look forward to that content. I know that's some really extensive research that you put in for any of those articles. So I look forward to it when it comes out. I don't know if Lou Grown, are you still with us? If you want to give a final thought and shout out, you can now.
Yes, sir. Cheers, y'all. I am at Lou Grown on Insta and YouTube, and it was an absolute pleasure being on the show with the best panel on YouTube. I'll be tuning in week to week. So can't wait for more content. And cheers, y'all. Grow love. I really appreciate the opportunity to show my plants, and love to come back on in the future.
You'll definitely be welcome in the future, man. It was awesome having you. Cool to see the Limarilla harvest and the Australian bastard cannabis. It was really great having you, to be honest. And also shout out to Cheddar Bob for coming on again. Also want to say, check out pbreeding.com. He's got an upcoming drop coming out on the 29th. And Aaron the Grower's got atgacres.com, where you can get the plant packer. Matthew Gates just mentioned earlier some of the places you can find him. You can also find him on Patreon, where you can start as little as $1 a month to support and get access to his Discord server and get primary access to him and answering your questions about IPM and related topics. So make sure to support these guys. And last but certainly not least, myself, I'm your host, Jack Greenstock. I love being here every week, even if I forget to show up to the show. And my panel reminds me, hey, gotta send the link, gotta get us going live. So I think that we kept it mostly smooth. You can find my little at Jack Greenstock here behind me. On Instagram is where I'm primarily at. You can also find me Jack_Greenstock on Twitter. You can email jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. And if you'd like a copy of my book, 50 Strains of Green, you can go to 50strains.com. Trying to put in the last 50 days of work on 50 strains of purple. So I have 50 strains for each book, and I'm just going through and getting all the information, doing some editing, working with my editor. Shout out to Ancient Soul Grown. He's been in the chat throughout the night. Awesome dude. He's helps with the formatting of the 50 Strains series. He did the second edition. So big cheers to him, and shout out to Sequence for doing the covers for me, and Lady Greenstock for the lovely cover photography. But with that said, this is Jack Greenstock signing out. Grow love, everybody.
Grow love.
Grow love, y'all.
We'll catch you next week.